Hello everybody, and this is Lemurium Psi with Psi Life. This is another off-script session. This is episode 3, talking about the left-hand path and police brutality. Now, this is an off-script discussion, so be warned. This is not for the faint at heart. You might feel triggered by some of the discussion. You might even assume that the discussion around human suffering or your spirituality or the human condition might be irreverent. So if you are sensitive to these topics, make sure that you don't watch this video, watch something else. But if you are interested in expanding your awareness and your experience of what it means to be human beyond the limitations that are currently set, then continue watching. I think you'll find this a fascinating listen. I'm going to be talking about police brutality and the left-hand path, and how this perspective, how the left-hand path perspective can help to clarify and expand some of the understandings around this a little bit more. A lot of the concepts in the left-hand path I am using in my structure here, in my discussion. So I am not going to say, okay, apotheosis and police brutality. I'm actually going to use it and apply it in a way that works. And if this is something that you find interesting, keep watching, because this is for people that are spiritually mature and actually want to transcend some of the drama and the fear that's associated with these, overly publicized incidences of police brutality that single out one group of individuals in the American, community, the American nation, whatever we want to call this collection that we're part of. So, the concept of whiteness started in 1639. There were laws in Virginia that were kind of the beginning of when we started to see a stratification of the society based on the concept of black versus white. White was, like I said, first kind of showed up in the law books in Virginia, where certain people at a certain level of society, those who had money, primarily those of European descent, but there were several Africans who did get classified as white. But primarily it was a financial economical class structure that tended to favor men from Europe who happened to be people with money, and that included the Dutch and the English primarily, but not necessarily Irish or Scottish. Irish and Scottish people were often brought over as slaves. Yes, I said slaves. Read the book White Cargo. It's a really great book that talks about that in detail, but you can just Google it, you'll find it. But the concept of whiteness started around the 1630s. Now, you look at the 1630s, the United States didn't start until 1776. 1789, we had our first president. So that was over a century, almost a century and a half, in which, actually close to a century, more than a century and a half, when you think about it. Yeah, there was a century and a half, 1789, 1639 to 1789. That's all. That's a century and a half. So it was a century and a half that this concept of white was evolving and changing in the colonies and whatnot. And so different states, or different colonies, I should say, there were no states at that time, but the different colonies had different concepts and were building different understandings around this concept of white. During that time, there was an effort to otherize different groups of people. Whether they were poor, they were brought over as indentured servants or slaves, as the Irish were brought and Scottish were brought, or if they were indigenous people who had been indentured into servitude or who were enslaved, and then later on the Africans that came over or were brought over. A lot of the Africans were already here, by the way, prior to the formation of the colonies. Just look into the works. Oh God, there's so much. But I'll just put out there Ivan van Sertima, Alexander von Woutenau, the direct writings of Amerigo Vespucci. I have to put a lot of these things in when I talk about Africans being here before Europeans, because people don't believe that, unfortunately. But there's lots and lots of evidence out there. You can do your own research. So the concept of white, 1639 was compiled, and then started to play with it and try different things with it. The laws changed over the years. Now, during this time, the concept of black did exist. It actually predated the colonies. The concept of black was applied to people like the Scottish and the Irish during the time of, I'm not going to say his name because I forget it, but one of the rulers in England who wanted to wipe out the Scottish, I think it was Cromwell. And we'll look back at that. But the concept of blackness was applied to the Irish and Scottish before the formation of the colonies. And they were treated terribly. They were less than second-class citizens. They were even, some wanted to exterminate them from the face of the earth, and they were referred to as black. Now, that's a very interesting bit of history to kind of lead up to why blacks are being killed by cops and why the left-hand path matters here. Now, left-hand path is about taking a different perspective generally. It's about understanding taboos and embracing them instead of running from them. It looks at individuality, apotheosis, and enlightenment. So when there's a really big, emotional, dramatic event happening in society, people on the left-hand path are going to look at it twice. They're going to look at it 3 or 4 times. Justice is a very big part of the left-hand path, but morality is not. So when we look at this, we have to look at it a little more objectively and say, okay, this is the history of these classes in the United States and these groups of people. Now, blacks started to be applied to people in the lower classes. So it included Scottish, Irish, anyone who was brought over as an indentured servant or a slave or something like that. Even people from West Africa were given this label. At first it was Negro, but then over time black became sufficient. There's an obvious class stratification here when it comes to police brutality. Blacks and whites are fictitious groups, okay? But unfortunately in Western society, in our culture, I'm including myself in this, even though I'm Commission, I'm American. In Western society, the concept of blackness is always something nefarious, negating, dark, sullen, dirty, evil, wicked, and hidden or occult, okay? Occult by definition is hidden. And so when you think of terms like black plague, not a good plague, black male, not a good form of manipulation, black death, black plague, black lie, black sheep, black list, black Friday. Anytime you use black prior to something, you are negating it and giving it a nefarious quality or a darker quality. And so when you apply that to people, the unconscious association immediately happens. And what makes this issue even worse is that there's an entire collective group of people in this country that willingly accepts the moniker of black. Not only do they accept it, but it's embedded, tattooed into their concept of themselves. And so that is unfortunate for them. Now, when you think about police brutality as it pertains to this group called the blacks, think about people from the West Indies, think about people from Africa, think about people from the South Pacific that come to the United States, and see if you can find statistics for police brutality to those groups of people, even those groups of people that live in impoverished communities. And I would be really interested to know what you find out. I haven't done the research myself, so I would just like to know what you find out. I'm going to assume that you're going to have a ratio that's a lot lower than you will have for those who identify as Black American. So I'd like to know what you find out. Let me know. All right. So we can't unite blacks and whites to solve this problem because both are fictitious groups. And as long as the two groups buy into the identity, as long as whites will hold on to their precious whiteness, and as long as blacks will hold on to this blackness thing, those two groups can never fully unite. Now, in personal relationships and deep connections between individuals, the uniting does happen, right? Obviously, right? People get married, people have kids, people have parents that are white, blah, 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 blah. Adoptions take place. But as groups, as categories, they will never fully unite. Now, there has been a plan in place that both groups will be definitively extinct by 2034. This is occult information. I'm okay. It's okay for me to share that because very few of you will believe me, so it's not a big issue. But this plan has been in place for some centuries now, and that's just because initially the designation between white and black was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to die out 400 years ago, but it didn't. It's still here. We're still using it. So definitively blacks and whites are supposed to be extinct. The idea was to eradicate the blacks first in 2034 or by 2034. and just definitively, that was the idea. There's several groups that are helping to contribute to that, and it's a process. Now, that has been the plan again for centuries now. To get blacks and whites to dissolve each other is the current iteration. Idea is resolution by dissolution, by dissolving the two groups into each other, with the larger group absorbing the smaller group. So obviously the majority, the quote-unquote white majority, would absorb the smaller black minority. Now, unfortunately, the creation of these fictitious classes was intended to be an initial and temporary solution to social stratification during the colonial period in the Americas. I said that earlier, but it kind of stuck around. So there was some issues early on. They started to notice, okay, these dark-skinned people over here that we're bringing over to serve on our plantations are getting together with those dark-skinned people that were already here, and that's not working out for our money. And so in the beginning, the clear delineation between black and white had some issues. Now, there's a lot more to this. I won't get too much into it, but I will say that the old dichotomy of black and white, these are irrational, illogical, and they make absolutely no sense. A big problem is that for the vast majority of people of European descent who are in the United States, they don't want to let go of the white classification. Like, I regularly put white on my racial categories just to fuck with people, and I've been stopped by police officers in the backwoods of Tennessee, and they wrote white on my ticket as my race. I don't know why, but whatever. And they were nice to me. It's because I'm a sorcerer, probably. And so, where was I going? Basically, those two dichotomies are irrational. We know that. And we know it intrinsically. It makes no sense to call one group of people black and the other group of people white, especially when there's really no basis for blackness. And what makes this group of people black? What makes them black? African American is just as bad a term because it totally negates thousands of years of history that Africans are actually coming over with, and American Negroes don't have. We have a different type of history, and I'm referring to myself as American Negro. I know that's upsetting for people, but so why are we calling this group of people with various skin hues, various skin tones, various histories, various, financial backgrounds and educational backgrounds, why are we calling them black? Why are we calling a person white who's from the backwoods of the country, who has absolutely no money and has no teeth? Why are we calling them white, just as white as, upper echelon in Manhattan? It makes no sense. So it's obviously more than just a class issue. It is a racial categorization, but it doesn't make sense. There's too many internal inconsistencies. So it is intrinsically, and white people, they just don't want to give up that title. And so as we speak, a new race is being prepped for the next iteration and the next rotation. We're going through a reset. We're going through a kind of a reiteration. And as that's happening, there's clearing out the old, and they're replacing it with a new race. Now, this is just me pontificating right now and just kind of like predicting. There is potential for an American empire in the future, but the blacks and the whites are currently an impediment to the formation of that and to the sustainability of that. An American empire is just a global republic that has. It's a global republic with, God, how is it being designed? It's a global republic with, God, that's, okay, we'll leave that alone. It's basically a global republic. It does have a constitutional, it's a constitutional republic, but it's global. Okay, moving on. All right. So that's pretty much all I have to share right now about that. I think it's unfortunate, the things that are happening, not because of any other reason than, people are scared. It's creating a lot of chaos. And the unfortunate thing is that there's so many people that are being wrapped up in it. But the fortunate thing about it is that there's space, there's room for people to look at this situation and start to see through it and say, wait a second, when was the last time we did a brutality thing? Oh, that was a couple weeks ago. all these brutality things always happen like 3 in a row, don't they? 3 or 4 in a row over a period of time. Like Trayvon Martin, and then there was like a bunch of other people, and then everybody calmed down, and then COVID happened, and then so you start to notice patterns. You start to say, oh, wait a second, maybe there's something more to this than what I think. So for those of you who are like getting into the fear and it's like messing up your day, you're like, oh my God, what can I do? The world's falling apart. I feel so guilty for being so white and so privileged. And then the other side is, man, it's so hard being a black man in America. They tearing us down, they holding us down. Maybe we can transcend all of that and look at this from a human bird's eye view and say, okay, these are the patterns that are in place, and these are potential solutions that we can find in the process. And instead of getting emotionally riled up in it, stopping for a second and saying, okay, how can I make sure that I and my offspring are not impacted by this directly? So with that said, that's the left-hand approach. Take care of yourself, take care of your kind, meaning yourself and people that matter to you. Not just because a person comes from the same background as you, do they matter? Sometimes that's the best way to belittle yourself and stop your growth in the world. And this is a very left-hand approach. To say, oh, I'm part of this group of people, and whatever happens to the group happens to me. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. There are always outliers, and the outliers are the ones who create the future. It's usually the masses of people that get swept away. Time just erodes those people away. So with that said, I hope that that makes sense to a lot of you. If you have any comments, you have any questions, concerns, or interests, let me know. This video is a little longer than I intended it for it to be. I tried to cut this down to a shorter length. But it's useful, it's powerful, I think it's interesting. And I think people will be able to gain something from it, benefit from it. So, like I said, like, subscribe, share, comment below. Let me know what you would like to hear me discuss next. Now, I have other videos that are in the works right now. This is one I just wanted to put out. It's an off-script thing that I'm just putting out because I think it's a different perspective, and I think it's important for people to see it. Don't get wrapped up in the sensation of the moment. Yes, people are dying, and yes, the video is awful. It's just awful to see a person killed like that. But I could probably find for you 15 other videos that are just as horrendous from other countries of people doing hideous things to other groups. How some women are treated in some countries, how they're being beheaded, or they're being mutilated, or they're being tortured, or how some children are being killed. You can find all this stuff online. So, a police officer is slowly snuffing out the life of an American citizen who happens to have melanin-rich skin. That's just one of the many things out there. And if the media put out video footage of children being abused or molested or raped or killed, or women being mutilated in some of the countries around the world, or just some of the tribal infighting that's happening all over the planet, then you would have a better perspective. You would realize, whoever you are, that this is a human problem, and it's a human problem we can actually probably start to address. But the likelihood is that people won't change. And with that said, stay left, keep doing, what you need to do to survive and thrive and adapt as time changes and people move forward. And, don't buy into the hype.